The Hero's Journey, a Mindful Accord podcast, with your host, Rich Decker.
Hello, and thank you for taking some of your valuable time to listen to our show. Our guest on this episode is Jeff Zlotnik, who is founder and CEO of the Meditation Initiative, which has worked to bring the mental health benefits of mindfulness and meditation to more than 75,000 people for free since 2003. Jeff has led free meditations for homeless teens, K-12 public schools, juvenile detention centers, federal and state prisons, senior centers, the Wounded Warriors, sober living homes, the Superior Court of California Judges, the Braille Institute, and the list goes on and on. Jeff is also co-founder of the Dharma Bum Temple in San Diego, California, and you'll hear the story on how he raised $500,000 to make a down payment on this new temple in 108 days, which is a significant number in the Buddhist tradition. Jeff is also the founder of the first co-ed Buddhist fraternity in the country. Jeff is an amazing person who has accomplished so much. He is humble, but his journey is great. This is the hero's journey of Jeff Zlotnik. Well, thank you, Jeff. Thank you for joining us today on the Hero's Journey, a Mindful Accord podcast.
My pleasure. Honored to be here. Thank you very much.
Oh, the honor is all mine. Well, let me ask you the first question. I ask everybody that comes on the show this question. Can you tell us about your childhood?
My childhood, I was spoiled. That's the first thing that comes to my mind. I was, in fact, this year in August will be my parents' 50th wedding anniversary. I've got two older brothers, David and Joel. We are, Joel is 3 years older and David is 5 years older. So I was the youngest of three boys, born in Chicago, but moved to San Diego in 1979 when I was 4. So spent my whole childhood, really. My parents are still in the same house here in San Diego, near San Diego State University. You know, no childhood is perfect, of course. You know, you go through challenges. But as far as my upbringing from my parents, it was pretty flawless. I think I saw them fight once in my entire life, and that was probably because I got in trouble. Childhood from my parents, you know, family perspective, everything was wonderful. But for me, I was a troublemaker. You know, I was getting kicked out of classes as early as I can remember. And I always liked to kind of push people's buttons and cause a bit of conflict. And, you know, I remember, I think like a classroom report card, I was probably 7 years old, and it said something to the effect of, you know, Jeffrey's a great kid. He just needs to not talk so much and not be so disruptive. So that kind of sums up my childhood right there. You know, a lot of sports was my life. That really kept me, you know, out of major trouble and kind of focused on things and was really an outlet for me. But, you know, I look back, I have very good, fond, wonderful memories of childhood. And even when I got in trouble, a lot of that was kind of me just having fun and experimenting and doing a lot of things I shouldn't do that eventually I grew out of.
What kind of principles did your parents instill in you, and what do you still carry with you today?
You know, it's funny, when I was a kid, I used to think that my dad didn't have patience, and we always kind of joked that my father doesn't have patience. But as I've gotten older, and he is now, 74 years old, I've finally began to appreciate and understand how patient my father is, how diligent and hardworking he is. You know, he still works 3 days a week, you know, even at this age, and he's been working, you know, 50 years of his life probably. So diligence, his hard work ethic, definitely from my father. My mother, I think what I learned from her the most is just how to make everybody feel welcome and loved and happy and secure. You know, that kind of, I don't know if it's typical so much, but I wanted to say that typical mother's love for a child where that just made me feel so completely safe and as if I was the greatest thing in the world. We always joke, and anytime it's her birthday or anything like that, we give her gifts. She always says to us that, you know, we are her favorite gifts, her children. So I think just that endless love and compassion and care for other people. I could tell stories for days, but if it's Thanksgiving and my mother's going to pick up something from the store and she sees an elder person by him or herself, she will often be the one who wants to invite that person over for Thanksgiving, as if, they need people to be around. So that's just my mother.
Well, it sounds like a nice parents. It sounds like you had a very nice childhood.
Absolutely. Without that, I'd probably be in jail right now.
So you were a Hellraiser.
Definitely. Elementary school, definitely a bully and teasing people and picking on people, and that kind of carried into junior high and high school. And I think high school really I was just a troublemaker, and I was really fearless. And when you have kind of this fearless attitude towards life and you're 16 and you're just not afraid of anything, but you're so immature and, not too wise at all. And you put yourself around people and situations that can get you into trouble. I was the one who always just wanted to push the envelope and see how far I could go without getting caught.
And you never got in enough trouble to where that you had to stop?
The trouble that I got into wasn't, nothing with the law so much. It's not like I, did anything on that level. I was kicked out of high school my junior year. But as far as most of my actions, it wasn't like I was this kid that, was ending up in a, juvenile facility or detention facility or anything like that. I think I always, in the back of my mind, my parents raised me well. And so I think the trouble I was getting into was more of just stupid stuff, but nothing that was really causing major harm or violence or, destruction or anything like that would have really landed me in a situation where I was locked up and had to figure something out. I never really went that far.
So when you were a teenager or when you get out of high school, or what did you envision for yourself? What did you see Jeff doing? Was it sports related?
Yeah, I think, even in high school, I remember going to, I played baseball, football, soccer my whole life. Baseball or football, not till high school, but baseball, soccer my whole life. So baseball was the greatest thing in the world to me. And when I was 17, still playing, I started coaching as well. I remember going to a baseball camp your junior year where they kind of actually it was my sophomore year, and they take some of the best kids from the county. And I remember going with a buddy of mine, Dennis Twombly, who ended up getting drafted and played with the Yankees organization. Is actually still working, was a scout with them now. But I remember going to this camp, and they evaluate you for a couple days or a day or two, and then afterwards you meet with the head of the camp, and they have the college and pro scouts there, and they sat me down and they kind of gave me their evaluation. They said, "You know what, kid, you're going to be a hell of a coach someday." So, I realized, what, you're telling me there's not going to be too many 5'6", Jewish guys playing Major League Baseball someday? Is that what you're trying to tell me? I mean, the Jewish thing really has nothing to do about it, but, it's always kind of my joke.
Sure.
And so, I think go out of high school, going into college, I was really back and forth between sports and psychology. I loved people. I still love people. When you look at what I do today, I love working with people. And so even from a sports perspective, coaching from 17 years old, I coached for probably 20 years, at the high school level or high school age, a handful of years at the high school. I think in college, when I started at University of Arizona in Tucson and my degree was in psychology, I was working in group homes at that time, counseling adolescent females, all who'd been physically, sexually, emotionally abused. So I'm 20, these kids are 15. And I think at that time, my first couple of years of college, I realized that I just wanted to spend the rest of my life working with people, helping people find a sense of happiness in their life. And even though I was still young and struggling with my own, anger, depression, things like that, something about working with people and helping them find happiness in their life was really motivating and inspiring to me. And that the sports was always going to be just kind of this, passing thing that I love to be involved with.
Now, you didn't necessarily follow that path of helping people right off the bat.
Yeah.
You went to U of A, University of Arizona.
Correct.
And then you graduated and you were working in the corporate world, yes?
Yeah, it's ironic because when I graduated at 22, this was 1997, I had a job lined up to work in a group home in San Diego. My plan at the time, coming out of college, was to work for 2 years, build up some experience, and then apply to graduate school and get a master's and PhD in clinical psych. And graduation night, Ron Rabb, Dave Rabb was my best friend in college, and his dad said, "Hey, Jeff, do you want to come work for me in Philadelphia?" Coming out of college and thinking I need to make money and kind of get wrapped up in that whole world, I chose immediately to go to Philadelphia and forego really my original plan. So I spent 7 years. I was only in Philadelphia for a year, came back to San Diego in 98, spent 7 years doing consulting for initially RD Rab, and then rolled in as kind of a contract consultant, helping at that time in the late 90s, .com boom, startup companies, a lot of venture capital money. And so I helped startup companies build their organization, and I was selling HR consulting services within primarily the software industry, but helping young and already established organizations hire folks. So 7-8 years of consulting and making a lot of money and buying a lot of stuff, and still just wasn't happy.
When did you get to the point where you realized that this isn't working for me, that this path I've chose is not the right path?
Yeah, I think there was really one defining moment that I always talk about. And so this was 2003. So we're about, 7 years into my work life. I had my best friend since I was 13, Kristen Shea. She had to go to a Buddhist temple to observe a religious service for a teaching credential program she was doing at San Diego State. And she said, "Hey, Jeff, do you want to come with me?" And so I went in 2003. And I remember going to this temple, and I sat down and we did some meditation, and, the head nun, Venerable Ijir, gave a talk, and I just felt so at peace and so at home. And it was just an incredible experience. And I was there, I don't know, maybe an hour or so. And I talked to the master after, the head nun, and I said, I'll be back tomorrow. 6 months go by. I never go back. And at this stage of my life, I'm, 24 years old. Is that right? No, I'm sorry, about 28 years old. 28 years old and living downtown San Diego, kind of in that making a lot of money and going out to bars and clubs and, pretty fast-paced life. Never, I've done drugs, a lot, alcohol, but I was never an addict, so I never really had an addiction with anything. I like to go out and have a good time. So this night happens, and then 6 months go by, and I went out one night, and I was in line at this club with my couple of my best buddies, Kevin and Brian, and it was his birthday, and I had this, as we're standing in line, I had this realization, in about 20 seconds, this flash went through my head where I realized, okay, Jeff, you got no patience, you got a lot of money, you're going to stand in this line, you're eventually going to pay the guy in the VIP line to let you in there, and then you're going to pay the person at the door a bunch of money to go inside, and then you're going to spend a lot of money and, buy everybody drinks all night long, and, you're going to get drunk, and you're going to chase some girl around, and you're going to wake up the next day either with someone or alone, and you're going to feel like crap. And so I had that whole realization in my head because I'd done it, a million times. The night continued. That's exactly what happened. And I woke up the next day. First thought was I got a headache. And my second thought was I need to go back to that temple. So I went in at about noon. I picked up 2 books. One was called Lotus in the Stream, and the other was Graceful Exits, How Great Spiritual Beings Die. Read these 2 books, and I was done. I mean, for me, it was literally that moment that I just made this very clear, conscious decision that I was drastically going to alter my life. And, the ironic thing to me every time I talk about this is I didn't have this, I volunteered and worked in the recovery community for probably 15, 20 years. And I never had this rock bottom moment, this, near death, experience where, I almost lost everything. I never really had that moment. I just woke up the next day and immediately said, I just don't want to do this stuff anymore. And that was it. That was 2003. So I spent 2 years then up at that temple almost every day. I lived up right next to it. And my teacher at the time, she said, Jeff, you work so hard to make so much money to buy so many things. If you didn't have so many things, you wouldn't need so much money. You wouldn't have to work so hard. And it made perfect sense. I really tailored down everything I was doing to part-time to then where I could almost basically make no money and spend no money. did that for about 2 years. And then they said, you want to move to our home monastery in Taiwan? So February 2005, I shipped off to Taiwan and lived in a, Zen Buddhist monastery with a bunch of monks and nuns and a lot of lay people. And yeah, that gets me up to that point.
Why Buddhism? Because, were your parents practicing Jewish religion?
Yeah, I grew up Jewish family, always went to Friday night services, family services. Saturday morning Sunday morning I went to Hebrew school, Sunday school, and, all that stuff. And I was bar mitzvahed at 13. We were what I always refer to as like cultural Jews. Judaism was important to my parents and it was important to their parents, but it wasn't as if to me it was this heavy religious activity. It was something that really gave me a lot of very close family, close friends, and more of this community feel. Buddhism really, I wasn't really looking for it. It's just my friend said, do you want to come to this temple? I guess I should back up and say when I was 20 in college, I took a Chinese civilization class and we had to read a book, Intro to Zen by D.T. Suzuki. So at the age of 20, and that would have been, I guess, 1995, I started reading books on Buddhism. And I thought they were fascinating. But it wasn't like I was becoming Buddhist or drastically changing my life. But something about what I was reading really resonated with me. So for the next 7-8 years, it just became this cool thing to read about and learn about and study, but I wasn't changing my life at all. Until Kristen said, do you want to come to the temple with me? And then, 6 months later, went back to the temple. And so I guess your question, why Buddhism? I don't really have a reason other than when I went to that temple, the way it made me feel when I was there is something that I really can't put into words. But I just felt like that idea that, I had found a home in a sense that really, in many ways, recreated what I grew up in, which just helped me feel safe and comfortable and very much at peace when I was there.
Well, for me, I was raised Catholic in a pretty strict Catholic home, and I abandoned all religion, and I don't really consider myself a Buddhist necessarily. If anything, I'm a secular Buddhist, but Buddhism, even as a philosophy, there's so many truths in it, so much truth to it in my mind. So, they've been studying the mind intensely for thousands of years. I think they figured out a few things.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that, my world today with Dharma Bum Temple and everything we do with Buddhism is, there could be 70 people here for a meditation and a talk. And if I say how many of you are Buddhist, you'll get about 3 hands that go up. And so to me, I see the beauty of, this 2,500-year-old religious practice, which in other parts of the world, you go to Taiwan, you go to Japan, you go to places like that, Buddhism is very much a religion. But for the most part, in the Western world, the way it's practiced in a modern day is the people aren't coming into Buddhism to become Buddhist. They're coming into Buddhism for everything you just touched on, which is how to help understand the mind and the heart and find a sense of peace and happiness. Somebody asked the Dalai Lama years ago if this country needs more Buddhists, and he said, this world has enough Buddhists. America doesn't need more Buddhists. We just need more people who are peaceful and happy. And I have another dear friend who referred to Buddhism as a software upgrade, that her being Catholic, was very important to her. And she said once she began to learn about Buddhist teachings, loving kindness, compassion, joy, equanimity, all these kind of core fundamental teachings, it made her a happier person, which in turn brought her closer to her religious faith. And so I thought, and I still think that's such a great application of looking at what did the Buddha teach and how do you integrate that into your life.
When you started this transformation, who was your mentor?
It was a Venerable Izhir here in San Diego. She was one of the nuns. I would consider my master here for 2 years. And when I went to Taiwan, I lived in, a very traditional Buddhist monastery where there is a headmaster. And then I also had a lot of, teachers, mentors, friends within the Buddhist college who I looked up to, and they taught me a lot, and I learned a lot from them, whether it was just from, and it's funny because when people think about what is monastery life and what did you learn, I learned how to wash clothes on a washboard. There's no sutra, Buddhist teaching on like the washboard sutra, but to put it into context, the things that I learned living in a Buddhist monastery, in some ways had nothing to do with Buddhism, the way we typically look at Buddhism, right? The way it's written about in books. But for me, growing up, my mother always doing my laundry, right? Or if I lived on my own and didn't have a washer dryer, taking it to a laundromat, and here I am, and I've got one pair of, basically a gray kind of robe thing that I wore, and, pants and a top. I had two of them, and we washed one and we wore one. So the kid from India was a very dear friend of mine there, and he taught me how to do laundry with a washboard. Another kid I watched, I would joke with him and I'd say, if you come to America, I'll teach you how to put, quarters in a machine, because we're so spoiled and fortunate in so many ways, or at least I was, Another kid, I went into class one day and he was plucking his beard with a tweezers. And I said, "What are you doing?" And he says, "I'm shaving." I said, "Well, doesn't that hurt?" And he says, "Yeah, but this is how we do it. This is all we have." So the next day, before I left for Taiwan, I had, went to Costco and I stocked up on my Gillette Mach, whatever you got. And I bought probably 100 of them and I brought them there because, God forbid you should run out of razors when you're living in a Buddhist monastery. And, so I go that next day, I came down to class and I brought him my razor and I handed him the razor and I handed him shaving cream. And I said, "Here, you need to try this." And, he would spend one day plucking the top half of his face and the other plucking his neck. And so I give him the razor and it comes back the next day and he's all clean shaven and smiley and hands me the shaving cream and he says to me, "Jeff, but what's this for?" And I didn't even think to point out that, which way he should use the blade or which way he, how he should use the shaving cream, all that kind of stuff, if you do it in the shower. So those types of things, that's what has made a lasting impact on my life. I have endless examples like that. But to this day, those really cheap blue razors, you can get 20 of them for about $2. That's all I use, and I'll use it until it's rusty because they work just the same. And so there's lessons that I've put into my life based on these experiences that I learned living with monks and nuns, and for 11 months in Taiwan, that you don't get these experiences in a book.
Now, you were a lay person there, correct?
Exactly. I was a lay person. I did not ordain. I've never been a monk. At that time, I thought about being a monk, but it's just not my path now. But I lived very much like a monk when I was there. I wasn't going out into the town and hanging out in the city and things like that. I mean, I pretty much said, if I'm going to move to Taiwan and live in a monastery, then I want to live this life in the monastery.
Well, a monk's life or living in a monastery is a very difficult life, yes?
Very challenging, a lot of discipline, a lot of structure. I lived in what they call the male Buddhist college. So it's a training. I mean, you're really a young monk in training, and not everyone in there was monks. They had lay people, but many of the lay people who lived in there would go on to become monks. Not all of them, but many did. So it's very much a training program. The discipline that, you're waking up every morning, you got 15 minutes to brush your teeth, splash water in your face, put your robe on, get in line. You're, a lot of bowing, a lot of chanting, very structured. You have a job you're working on every day. You have classes. Your bed has to be made a certain way. You're a lot of discipline, a lot of structure. Very much when military folks would come through and I'd give them tours, very much military style discipline.
Well, I think we all need that. The mind needs it.
Yeah, I do talks about once a month now at MCRD, the Marine Corps recruit base here in San Diego. And so our Buddhist group has probably, 150 people there every week, and I go once a month. And when I talk about my monastery experience, their ears kind of perk up because we talk about the similarity between boot camp and monastery life. And I always joke and I say the difference is I don't have somebody screaming in my face, but you're eating what you're given. You wear the same thing every day. You let go of your ego and your pride and the questions, and you just follow because you trust the process.
So when you got back from Taiwan, what did you do then?
I ran and I hid. I remember landing in LAX and walking off, and I was just like, "Oh, I don't want to be here." But for the first 6 months, it was longer than that, really. But the adjustment period, it was really difficult early on. I remember coming back and just going into a Vons or a Ralph's or a grocery store, and just like it hurt in a way. Like I couldn't do it anymore. a lot of that has since worn off. I had a really hard time when I first came back, going to hang out with old friends at loud places or things like that. I really had kind of an adverse reaction. And, when people ask me if I got all peaceful in the monastery, and I tell them all I realized for 11 months was what a mess was, what a mess my head was. And, about 9 months in, my teacher said, how are you doing? And I said, great, I don't want to leave. And she said, well, it's time for you to go back, and you need to kind of figure out how to bring what you've learned into the Western culture and into the life you're living there, because that's where you come from and that's what you know. So those first 6 months, I felt almost lost in a way, because I went back to the temple I came from, and I just felt that the ideas I had to integrate the practice of meditation and Buddhism into this culture, I was really stuck in a very beautiful but very kind of heavily culturally oriented organization. And so eventually a couple of us decided to start our own Buddhist organization called the Dharma Bum Temple, that time Dharma Bum Center, really trying to figure out how to bring everything that we had learned in this lifestyle into a culture and a place that we knew, where, without the bowing and the chanting and the robes, but what are the, everything that you love and everybody else loves about Buddhism, which is just what did the Buddha actually teach and how can that impact your life? That's what we wanted to create.
I always wonder if the Buddha would see what became of Buddhism, if he'd be disappointed.
I don't. I've heard that question a few times, and I think it's been a while. It's probably been a couple years since I've heard that question, and I think it's funny because as I'm starting to speak about this, I realize, at least from my view of myself, how much I've evolved, I think, with this path and this practice, and that I don't believe he would be disappointed. I believe that the Buddha himself, in his just immense ultimate wisdom, would recognize that it's a journey and it takes time. And in a new culture, you got to start somewhere. So what Buddhism is today in the West is not necessarily what it's going to be 50 or 100 years from now in the West. There's a great teacher, Shunryu Suzuki, who would say that when Buddhism enters a new culture, it's like holding a flower next to a rock and expecting the flower to take root in the rock. That's how difficult it is. So now back to, I think, maybe your point, you got American culture and you have Buddhism. And those two things couldn't be further from, they're opposite. But as Buddhism has for 2,500 years, it always has to mesh with local culture. So I think the stage and the phase we're in right now is, for the last 50 years, is watching how does the teachings of the Buddha integrate into this Western American society. I don't think we're there yet. I think there's a lot of beauty to it, and I also think there's a lot of points that need a lot of work. That's kind of back to your question. I don't think he would be disappointed. I think he would see the beauty of how hard people are working to really localize Buddhism in this culture, and would probably tell us all to be patient.
What about the idea of it became a religion versus a way of life? How do you think? I mean, that's kind of what I was thinking, if he'd be disappointed that it became a religion.
Well, it is a religion. If you think about, this is one of the most common questions I get asked, and I present it two ways. If you go up to someone in Taiwan today, where I lived, and you tell them that Buddhism is not a religion, it's kind of insulting, right? If you go to Thailand and you tell them that Buddhism's not a religion, I think that's kind of insulting, because to them, it's very much a religion. It's a very religious, devout, faith-based practice. Now, the difference is, in our kind of Western definition of religion, we say belief in a higher power, right? Like a God. And in Buddhism, that doesn't exist. There isn't the belief in the higher power or the God. So from that standpoint, right, by definition, it's not a religion. But fast forward to today, Western culture, Western folks tend to practice it as a philosophy and a way of life. So ultimately, I don't think it matters if you call it a religion or not. I think what matters is, what did he teach, and are you putting it into your life? But it's been practiced and considered one of the world's oldest, largest religions for 2,500 years. So I see the beauty of both sides of it. And like I said, most people that grow up in America are not growing up Buddhist. They're growing up Christian, Catholic, Muslim, Jewish, pagan, whatever you want to call it. And when they enter Buddhism much later in life, very often, not always, very often they enter Buddhism because they got turned off for some reason by their existing religion. And so they turn to Buddhism and they say, well, I'm into Buddhism because it's not a religion. But the religion itself is not the problem. The religions themselves are never the problem. The teachings themselves are never the problem. It's the people, right?
Yeah.
That's my view. I'm pretty sure Jesus and Buddha and all the other great spiritual leaders for the last thousands of years were all saying really wonderful, beautiful things for the most part. That's my take on it.
So when you started the Dharma Bum, what was your intention to bring the teachings to the West? But what did you do after you started the Dharma Bum?
Yeah, when it first started, it was really, a few of us who initially just wanted our own place that we could study Buddhism, talk about Buddhism, practice meditation without the cultural barriers. The temple I was at, I called it a revolving door, where I would see all these Western people come in because they're interested or want to learn about Buddhism, or college kids are coming to learn about Buddhism. And because of specifically the temple I was at, which is what most Asian cultural temples are, you have the bowing, you have the chanting, you have the robes, you have the language barriers. So we initially just wanted a place that would move beyond that. And ironically enough, here we are, that started at the end of 2006, and here we are 2018, so into our 12th year. The intention is still the same. A place that anybody from any religion, any race, any gender identity, any sexual orientation, any ability can come in as they are and learn, what did the Buddha teach and how can this impact my life and make the life for myself and those around me better. So the intention from then till now hasn't really changed. I think the way we practice and share it has evolved a lot, especially after those first couple of years. It's been a pretty steady intention for a good 10 years now. Early on, it was just a matter of kind of watching it and seeing, how do we practice in the space? How do we care for the space? How do we, when we called it Dharma Bum Center and changed it to Dharma Bum Temple, we didn't always behave in the center itself the way we would have behaved if we went to a Buddhist temple. So we started to change our behavior in the place. And that was, without getting into it's a very long story, but in brief, we changed the name from center to temple because we knew how we would treat, as young Western kids, a Buddhist temple. And we felt we needed to start treating this place the same way. So we called it a temple.
Just a change in mindset.
Exactly. And it's funny because, you don't just start a Buddhist temple. I have so much respect for lineage and tradition and history of Buddhism that, without us, we were just all lay people, no monks, no nuns, no master, nothing. And so it's in many ways, it's kind of arrogant and ridiculous to just call a place a temple. But we did. And don't tell anyone, but it's worked so far. But it really was, I remember the day we changed it, and I truly mean it was symbolic. It was symbolic of the word temple that reminded us we are at a Buddhist temple. Treat it properly.
It's interesting. Now, we'll get to where you're at now with the temple, but when I first came across you, I guess, what has it been, about 3-4 years now?
Yep.
You were doing the meditation initiative, which you're still doing. Can you explain that and what made you start that?
Yes. So the meditation initiative, this was 2007. I was asked to come into a local school here in San Diego, and the counselor was into yoga and really thought it would be advantageous to share meditation with the students and the parents. So I got asked to invited in, and being a Jewish kid in San Diego and then getting into Buddhism and spending time in a monastery and now being asked to go into a school, I believe that religion and spirituality is not a place that belongs in the schools. So I had to, in essence, create a way to bring meditation into a public environment. This is my mindset that all happened very quickly in 2007, into a public sector environment, a public school, and bring a meditation practice in that wasn't tied to any sort of religion or spirituality. So I kind of just crafted a very simple meditation practice and started leading it in this one school. I would go into 3 classrooms. They had a Friday morning moms group. They spoke Spanish predominantly, so I would lead the meditation. It was translated into Spanish. And it was a really lovely, 20-minute group on Friday mornings with the moms. And that was 2007. So over the next 2 years, from 2007 to 2009, the word got out. And next thing you know, I don't know, maybe one of the kids had a brother at a middle school or high school. So I ended up at that school. And then by 2009, I found myself in probably 25, 30 places a week. I was going to a number of schools. I was going to the prisons. I was brought into the military population to lead with the active and veteran combat folks coming back with PTSD and traumatic brain injuries. And, next thing you know, schools, prisons, hospitals, cancer clinics, victims of abuse, domestic violence, Catholic charities, Christian youth groups, Jewish family services, 3 different military locations, substance abuse programs within the military. It just took off. Every place I went, I just continued to craft a style and a method that was really focused on mental, emotional health and well-being, dealing with stress, anger, anxiety, sadness, and depression. So in 2009, after about 2 years of this happening, I incorporated and founded the Meditation Initiative, which is a 501c3 educational nonprofit that brings free meditation to everyone, anywhere. And so it's an outreach component. We don't have a location. You can't come to our classes. There's nothing to join. We just go out into the community and we'll sit with thousands of people a year for free. And so these 2 organizations really run completely independently of each other. They have nothing to do with each other. A lot of people kind of blur them a little bit because they see me involved in both. In the Meditation Initiative, I'm a Jewish kid from Del Cerro who likes to help people deal with stress and anger and anxiety and sadness and depression and, work on focus and attention and find a sense of peace and happiness. And in the Dharma Bum Temple, I'm a kid who, learned a lot about Buddhism and sees how that can impact people's lives.
So how would you explain meditation to someone who's never experienced it or perhaps is interested in it? Because I know for me, it was always this kind of weird thing, like something that hippies and monks did.
Exactly. And when I do the workshops or train the trainers or anything like that, when I start the meditation, the same thing I say every time is I tell people, look, nothing's going to happen to you. You're not going to float away. You're not going to have any mystical, magical experiences. You will not think nothing. Often people think that their mind is going to shut off or they're going to go blank, right? You'd end up sitting there telling yourself, think nothing, and that's a waste of time. To not judge it, to not sit there expecting or waiting for some grand aha moments or any deep realizations, that you're literally going to sit there for a few minutes. You're going to watch your mind race. You're going to attempt to follow the breath. And in a few minutes, we will be done. And then I lead a meditation for 3 to 5 minutes. So I don't spend 45 minutes talking about meditation. I don't show people a bunch of research on what it does to the gray matter of the brain and sympathetic, parasympathetic nervous system and the vagus nerve. All that research that's out there that is beautiful and wonderful and a lot of people focus on. I don't focus on it. I work with the Navy psychiatrists, prison psychiatrists who do deal with that stuff. But to me, I'll introduce myself for 2 or 3 minutes, a little bit about my background, and then we start a 5-minute meditation practice. So then once we've done the practice, anything that they would question or doubt or wonder about, I don't have to answer anymore. Now they understand it. But when people come, and ask me to come in and talk about meditation, I say, I don't talk about meditation. We will do meditation. And then I'm happy to answer questions.
That's great.
I would say most of the world in the Meditation Initiative that I deal with, I'm bringing it into an environment where it is brand new to most of them. Or at least they've been exposed to it maybe, It's not a regular practice for them. Even yesterday, yesterday I went in the morning, I was at a corporate office that works with, helping retired folks retire. And you got 15 kind of corporate America executives, things like that. And I went in for free. But you know what else they are? They are human beings who have, husbands and wives and partners and, it's kids and mothers and fathers, and they're dealing with the same level of stress and anxiety as everybody else. I help them deal with stress and anxiety. And then 2 hours later, I end up and I'm at the Naval Medical Center Balboa, and I'm working with a group of people coming back from combat who are dealing with PTSD and traumatic brain injuries. Everywhere I go, it's really the same thing, but I'm not trying to get them into it. I just share the meditation, and then they realize, wow, this works.
They experience it.
Experience it, exactly. And from a discussion standpoint, there was a woman a few years ago, she's with Sharp Healthcare for many years. She said, Jeff, thank you for demystifying meditation, because exactly kind of what you said when you asked me the question, depending upon what generation you're from, but especially older generations, they see meditation tied to religious spiritual practice or the hippie days or things like that. And to me, it's got nothing to do with that. All of that, sure, includes meditation, but that's just one tiny aspect of it. It's the comment about demystifying it is I always say I'm trying to actually undo what a lot of people have learned about meditation over the years, because it is, in fact, the thing that stops people from doing meditation.
With the world we're moving to at a lightning speed, I think meditation is going to be ever more important. The more connected we are, the more disconnected we are from ourselves, and the less quiet we have in our own minds.
Exactly. And that's, I always say, I just did this Train the Trainer, and there were probably 75, 80 people there, and I spent 5 hours helping them feel comfortable and learn how to lead others in meditation. And a lot of them kept wanting to know, like, well, what am I supposed to teach them? And my response that I said about 50 different ways is, you're not teaching them anything. You are just creating a space for them to get quiet for 5 minutes and breathe. And when you get quiet for 5 minutes and breathe, you actually begin to pay attention to what you think and how your neck hurts or your shoulders hurt or your back hurts, or whatever physical, mental, emotional pain. So to me, meditation is not about being good at meditation or perfecting the art of meditation. Meditation is about getting quiet and still, kind of as you just mentioned, so you can then begin to recognize what changes you might need to make in your life so you don't feel so stressed out and anxious and angry all the time.
You started I guess we call it a fraternity, sorority. I'm curious about that. Could you explain that to me?
Yeah, that's it's. I mean, you can't. I'm smiling ear to ear and I'm laughing because I still can't figure out how that all happened. I mean, I know exactly how it happened, but it's hysterical. So let me sum this up. It's one of the most beautiful things that I've ever been a part of. So we took over in 2009, 2010. There was a store in the college area near San Diego State called Buddha for You. And this guy opened it about 18 years ago. He was 70 years old at the time, and it sold Buddhist statues, Asian art, all that stuff, singing bowls and mala beads and incense. And, it was a cool little Buddhist shop in a San Diego State area. So 2009, he's going to close it. To kind of sum that up, he says, Jeff, if you don't take this store, it's done. So I turned to Maggie, who's been my partner with all this stuff for the last 10 years, and said, what do you want to do? And she said, let's take it. So we take this little Buddha shop near San Diego State, right? And the first thing we did immediately was turn the back of it into a meditation hall. So we moved a location after about the first year, but we moved it right next to Vons. So imagine a strip mall. You got Vons. We were in between Vons and I-10. So you got Vons, you got I-10, you have Yogurtland, you have Tapioca Express, you have an Indian restaurant, you got a little school at the end. You have just a complete commercial strip mall. And in the middle of it is a little Buddha shop with a meditation hall in the back. And I used to joke and say it's like the mafia movies. You have your restaurant in the front and the gambling ring in the back. That's kind of what this was, right? This store was a front for our meditation hall. A couple years in, or really about a handful of years in, we start seeing all these college kids showing up for meditation. 2015, I had talked to a couple of the students and Abby, one of the co-founders. And I said to her, we should start a Buddhist fraternity at State. And she told me that she had started one in college, not a Buddhist one, but started a sorority in college a couple years ago. And I said, well, let's do this. She put together the logo for it. She made the graphics. I built the Facebook page and a web page and kind of a landing page. And I asked Sarah Walsh, she and a couple other students had been coming to meditation. I asked Sarah to be the first president. And we just kind of decided that we were going to start this co-ed Buddhist fraternity. And we hadn't even started yet. And one of the students who would come to class said, can I do a story on this? And I said, sure. So she wrote an article in the Daily Aztec, Caitlin Leary. And I'm thinking, it's a school newspaper. Nobody really reads these things, right? Well, she wrote this article, which was beautiful. KPBS picked it up. The Union Tribune picked it up. Next thing you know, I've got major media channels doing interviews with me about the nation's first ever Buddhist fraternity. And it got, AP Press picked it up. So you got national news on this thing, but it didn't even exist. So I got asked, I showed up at the campus at San Diego State to meet with the student life leadership, kind of the head and the dean. And I said, I'm really sorry about all this press and this media when this program doesn't even exist yet. And she said to me, look, Jeff, most of the media we have these days is negative. So I don't know what you're going to do, but if you're going to get our kids to be calm and quiet and peaceful and teach them about compassion and helping others, then I support you, right? So September 9th, 2015, we had our first meeting. There were 14 of us there. And we built the program based on the Buddhist teachings. It's called the Paramitas. And the foundation of the program is based on the practices of generosity, morality, patience, diligence, concentration, and wisdom. So we meet once a week on campus. Wednesday night is open to all students. We get probably 80 to 100 students there. We do a meditation. We have a discussion based on, these core Buddhist teachings, loving kindness, compassion, things like that, dealing with greed and anger and ignorance, and how to overcome that with generosity and compassion and wisdom. And then we started 4 semesters ago a pledge program, which is very much your traditional Greek structure, where you have a new group of quote-unquote pledges who spend 10 weeks together. And they're involved in community service. They're involved in on-campus meditation. They're involved in really giving back to the community, but also exploring together with another group of people what it's like. And this thing has just taken off. It's incredible. To have 80 kids in a room talking about, the other night, the topic was sexual misconduct. And so we had 80-something people in a room talking very openly and honestly and genuinely and sharing their thoughts about sexual misconduct. What is happening with Delta Beta Tau does not happen anywhere in this country. I am just convinced of that. And to have college kids feel comfortable and safe to talk about these things, which what in essence at the beginning are complete strangers, is remarkable. So that's the best way I can sum up Delta Beta Tau. It gives people a home and a place twice a week to be themselves.
So let's get to where you're at today and the purchase of the church and the transformation of the Dharma Bum Temple. And I read an article you were in, which is a Southwest Airlines magazine. Is that correct?
Yes.
The question I've been dying to ask you since I've read that to you is,
yes.
I want you to explain the process of what you went through, but when you said that it was the best practices as a Buddhist in getting this temple together, I want you to explain that.
Yes. So to give it a very brief background, so after, we had been downtown in about 1,100 square foot Dharma Bum Temple for nearly 10 years. At the same time, as I just mentioned, we had this other location near San Diego State, Buddha for You gift shop meditation hall in San Diego State area. They're about 10 miles apart. So we're renting both of these locations and had passively looked for a way to bring these two worlds together and own property as opposed to renting, two spots, and somewhere that could house really everything that we do, because we were really limited in the small spaces. Every so often we'd find an old church, we'd look at it, it just didn't feel right. And then in about August of 2016, Alex, one of our board members, and he's been around really for 10 years since the beginning, sent me a link to this 90-year-old church that is in University Heights, which is just about 5 miles, not even 5 miles, probably 3 miles outside of downtown, right outside of Hillcrest, very central, right offside the freeway, right off the major freeway going into downtown. And this church was built in 1927. It was Emanuel Swedenborg, was a Christian mystic from the 1700s. In fact, Swedenborg, or D.T. Suzuki, wrote a book in the 1900s and said, all you Westerners, the Buddha's teachings that you should follow are the teachings of Emanuel Swedenborg. And even wrote a book titled Swedenborg, Buddha of the North. So here we found a 1927 Swedenborgian church that had been on the market empty for 6-8 months. Developers had offers in on it, and they were going to tear it down. And we stumbled upon it. And the moment that Maggie and I walked into this building, I just said to myself, this is our home. We need to get this building. Well, everything we do is free. We don't charge money. We don't have salaries. There's no, executive director pulling a salary. We operated downtown in the Dharma Bum Temple on basically $35,000 a year. We paid $2,500 rent every month, a few thousand here for miscellaneous expenses and whatnot, but no money, right? And here we sit with a $1.4 million property that we wanted to buy. So I got introduced to John Jarvis, realtor, commercial realtor, and we did a little bit of background check, and we decided, let's put an offer in. So John said to me, how much money do you have? And this is the end of 2016, about September, October. And I said, well, we have $7,000. Now, keep in mind, for the Dharma Bums to have $7,000 in our account, that's like millions in Dharma Bum dollars. And he said, well, they're not going to take us seriously unless you have $100,000 in your offer to open escrow. And I said, okay, well, tell them we'll have $100,000. He said, Jeff, you just told me you had $7,000. I said, how long do we have to get it? He said, you have probably about 2 weeks. They review it, they accept the offer, contingencies, things like that. You have about 2 weeks to produce that money. So October 29th, 2016, Anokai, a dear friend, board member, we built actually we hadn't built this yet, but we built basically a one-page campaign page. And I announced to our community that we were going to be raising funds to acquire this church. So in the first 2 weeks, we raised $103,800 from 321 people in 14 days. And we opened escrow. Now, the cute part was a lot of people thought we then owned the church. But that's just, as I say, that got us to the table. That brought us to the dance. And then we had an escrow period. It ended up being, ironically enough, and in Buddhism 108, it's a very auspicious number, but it ended up being 108 days from October 29th to February 14th for us to raise all the money as a down payment. Churches are very high risk to banks, apparently. And so it required a 35% down payment, which meant we had to raise $490,000 in essence, what came to a little over 3.5 months. So back to your original question, which was, in the Southwest article, I referenced, and I've been saying this a lot, that was the most incredible Buddhist practice I ever had to do, was for 3.5 months. It actually became about 5 months when we finally closed in April. But for 3.5 to 5 months, I had to put, as I mentioned earlier, the paramitas, the things that help us get out of a world of kind of discomfort and angst and what's called dukkha, suffering, is the practice of generosity, morality, patience, diligence, concentration, and wisdom. And I had to apply all 6 of these things every single day, every single moment, every single second, or I knew that we would not raise these funds. And so to take really my consulting background, my sales background, things like that, and apply everything I've learned about Buddhism and building and leading a community, to bring all of that to every moment of my entire life for 3.5 to 5 months took every ounce of practice I had. And it was, as I say, it's the most intense practice I've ever done. You know, living in a monastery life is challenging, but this, I was dealing with so many moving parts, so many elements, so many people. Someone asked me early on, you know, do we have a wealthy community? And I said, look, I don't know how much anybody makes. We don't have memberships. I'm not, you know, background. I'm not researching people. I don't know where they work. I don't know anything about them, but I know what the heart of this community is like. And all I tried to do for this entire campaign was paint the picture of what we could do in this new space and to motivate and inspire people to support it. And there were no tricks. There were no gimmicks. There was no, if you give us money, you'll get a free hat. There was no GoFundMe campaign. There was no give us money, we'll send you a bunch of CDs. It was, look, this is what we've done for 10 years. This is what we can and will do in this new space. And we need to raise a lot of money very quickly. And it was that approach every single day. And everybody, you know, if it was somebody giving $1 to somebody giving $80,000, it was every single penny that made this campaign happen. And that was all really driven by the heart and passion of this community.
Do you still have to engage those practices to keep it going? Because I'm assuming you're still making payments on this, yes?
Yeah, the practice, of course. I mean, my entire life, I try to engage those practices every moment. But once we move, the best way to explain this is what I told everybody during the campaign is the biggest push is going to be securing the property. Once we get it and we own it and we're here, all we're going to do is settle back into running the Dharma Bum Temple and the Buddha for You, the gift shop, and running everything we do out of here, no different than any way we did before. So it's why I kind of paused, because the campaign took a whole nother level of just 6 a.m. till midnight of not, you know, stopping to see a movie, or not stopping to really go take a walk, or not stopping to, you know, go have a dinner with a friend or something like that. That's what it was like during the campaign. But now once we're here, of course, we still have expenses, but I knew that once we got in the place, we could return to everything is still free, and we can just operate in the same manner we did for 10 years, just in a larger space with more people. So, of course, that the practice of the paramitas is what I work on every day of my life, but it's the intensity of running this place on a day-to-day basis is nothing like it was when we had to make sure we secured the property. You know, when you don't own it, at any moment in time, there's that possibility that it could be yanked away and it could never be yours, right? It's ours now. And so I'm not concerned about that.
Well, that's great. I love the fact, again, that you can take your teachings, and you could do this with any background, but actually make it a practical use out of it. That's what it's for.
Exactly. And that's where, to me, I really had to kind of dig deep and say, you know, how can you raise, I did interviews with a handful of fundraisers, professional fundraisers or nonprofit fundraisers, you know, after this campaign, and everybody wanted to know kind of what gimmicks did I use? What tricks did I use? I said, none. I just told people what we did and what we can do. There was no manipulation. There were no games. And in life, we're often trying to manipulate or play some game or trick people or just trying to win something. And the other part of this whole campaign was that we had to go about this. And I told myself every day, I didn't allow any doubt in my mind to exist. I just told myself every day that we could secure this property. And I also had to do that with the same, which is, you know, is a great Buddhist teaching of non-attachment, meaning we're going to do everything we can in every single moment to make sure we secure this property. But who knows? Maybe the seller decides, well, sorry, we do want to give it to a developer and let them tear it down because they're going to offer more money. So there were a lot of things that were out of my control. And again, to me, that's the practice of non-attachment, is that all we can focus on every day in our lives, with regardless of what we're doing, is what is my intention in this moment? What is my diligence? How hard am I going to work in this moment? And how much wisdom and compassion can I bring to this moment? And not be attached to the outcome or expectation.
It's hard to do. The non-attachment is very hard to do.
Yes, it is.
So that leads me to my last question then. And this is probably a difficult question to ask. From that time when you first had that feeling like, this isn't working, I need to change, to everything you've accomplished to this point, what do you attribute that to? What do you attribute your success to?
I think, interesting. What do I attribute to this success to? The first thing is, when I lead classes, I often say that everything that I'm sharing, at least from a Buddhist perspective, is really the same thing that most of us probably learned from a parent or some adult when we were a kid. That everything I've learned with Buddhism is common sense. I really have to attribute, and I'm not just saying this to sound like, thanks mom and dad type of thing. Somebody wins a Super Bowl and they're like, thanks mom and dad. But like, I really have to attribute this to, without my parents raising me the way they did, I never would have had that fearlessness. I always felt the love and secure, just that knowledge that they were always there. Now, when I was a kid, I used that, as I mentioned earlier, when you're fearless and you're 15, you're going to do things you shouldn't do. But I did them because I felt safe knowing that if I ever got in trouble, my parents would be there. And that was really instilled in me to live a life afraid of nothing. So when I think about as an adult and I lead these communities, whether it's the Dharma Bum Temple or whether it's the Meditation Initiative or whether it's, the Delta Beta Tau with the college kids, or we've built a family sangha in the Dharma Bum Temple, and we do in the recovery community, tying drugs and alcohol into Buddhist teachings and helping people deal with addictions. Like all of these worlds that we run in here, you got to be fearless. Because for me as a leader, someone told me years ago, I don't know where I got this, but I learned something years ago. They said, lead, follow, or get out of the way. And I've always looked at myself as a great leader. And I also consider myself an incredible follower. And I also know when it's time for me to maybe just get out of the way. I think another element that I attribute this to is when I look at all of these communities and I watch them grow and evolve and change and make mistakes and learn and continue to grow and evolve and change and make mistakes, I'm just driven and motivated by watching people and helping people find a sense of joy in their life. That's what drives me. And that's what brings me joy. I don't stop. I just keep going because, this life we have, it's so precious and so rare, and I don't feel should be wasted. And if I have the ability to impact this world in a way that can help people grow up, whether you're 18 or whether you're 80, then I'm going to continue to stay driven. That's what's on my mind right now. I'm sure if you asked me that question an hour from now, it'd be different. But there are so many things that, I attribute this path to. And a lot of it also is just not being afraid to be honest with yourself and say, I used to be this kind of person and I used to be mean, or, like the Southwest Magazine article, I used to be a bully and I used to be mean. I used to pick on people. I used to make people feel bad. That drives me also, because while I can't go back and change any of that, I can work every moment of my life to help people not have to go through those things and also hopefully not be those types of people. It's an incredible journey. I enjoy it. I wouldn't change anything about it. I've made a lot of mistakes. I'll continue to make mistakes, but I work on trying to be more humble every day and just endlessly grateful for how fortunate and privileged, that I am to have this life and to be aware of all of those around me that don't have the privileges that I have, to do what I can to help people along the way.
Thank you, Jeff. Thanks for sharing your hero's journey with us. And it's an inspiration to me, and it's a great story. I love it. And keep it up. And who knows where you'll be in 5 years? Who knows where any of us will be, right?
Right. Somebody said to me, "What's next?" I said, "Oh man, we're coming up on a year in this 6,000 square foot 90-year-old church." And they said, "What's next?" I said, I just want us to continue to settle here for a little bit.
Maybe cleaning the air ducts. That's next or something.
Right. Yeah. Next is going to fix our plumbing and back to cleaning the toilets because they need to be clean. That's what's next.
Awesome, man. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thank you for the time.
Thank you again for listening. And please leave any comments or suggestions. We're always looking for ways to improve our show and make it the best show it can possibly be. Visit mindfulaccord.com, where you can find additional episodes and you can follow our blog. We give some helpful information on mindfulness, meditation, and just ways to manage our everyday stressful lives. And most importantly, if you know of a friend or a family member that would benefit from this story, please share it with them. Until next time, I'm Rich Decker.